Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, there was this guy who was on set to basically be a technical advisor. And he just kind of stood up to the side, and this guy was fucking the shit. And they'd have this whole scene after that, blocked out and scripted everything. It was like, all right, guys, you're going into battle right now. And then they had like this whole apocalypse now thing. You're on the helicopter and you're yelling and yeah, there's all this stuff. And they kind of look over at him as like, Mike, whatever the fuck his name was, is like, anything you want to say? He goes, yeah, you could do it like that. They're like, anything you want to make? He goes, nobody'd be saying shit. He's like, no one, if you allow your emotions to become part of the equation, you'll go fucking crazy. And I love that notion of like, this can't be an emotional job, because if you start thinking, oh, I'm gonna get on this helicopter, this huge machine of war and destruction, and these 6 guys that I know, we're gonna ramp each other up, and we're gonna get down into the shit, and statistically speaking, 60% of them are going to die, and in the course of them dying, they are also going to deal out death, and each of them are going to kill at least 5 people. You just can't do that. So it's just like, all right, target down. And he goes, no one's saying shit because you know your job.
I remember watching real footage once during the early days, I guess, of the U.S. Invasion of Afghanistan, where it was from those planes that shoot these short
C-130
missiles. Yeah, they're taking out people that are a mile away. And I remember the complete emotionless like dispassion in their voice, where they were like, we have a target on the hill, firing in 3. Okay, we got him. Next target. And it was just like, it was like listening to someone sort through the inventory of like a hardware store. It was just so, and I remember it was very chilling, but I remember thinking, how could you do that job and not, 10 minutes in, you'd cease to function if you didn't have that as a kind of like an emotional barrier, I would think.
Counterpoint though, did you guys see those Navy videos that went up this week?
UFO, baby.
Yeah, the UFO videos. It's just the people in the Navy being like, bro, what is that, dude?
It's like, hey, man.
Well, that's different than killing. I feel like
it's true.
They're
identifying something not being on a battlefield.
Well, I mean, by definition, you're not identifying something.
Very true. Attempting to. There you go.
Yeah.
Nice one. That was a good actually there, Mike Biffle. Actually, by definition, you're not identifying it as it is unidentified. All right. I guess that's our
Is that our cold open?
Yeah. Is everybody recording?
I am.
Yeah, I'm
was I recording? I have no idea.
Hey, Austin, to piggyback onto that specific video that you're talking about was reference for Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So they brought us in. They were like, all right, so we're doing this because I think the first one that I was on, the first one that I auditioned for was World at War, which was not projected to do very well, and its sales weren't good until they did the zombies and the whole Army of Darkness thing, and that's what included that forever into that franchise, and really made that
they were right.
That specific one, I was like, this is stupid and campy. Because I remember, because I played Medal of Honor, and then I played Big Red One and all that stuff. I was like, fucking Band of Brothers, this is great. And especially one of the first games that I ever did was Brothers in Arms. I was like, I love that kind of tactical first-person shooter thing. So, but then we want to go, the first game that I was ever cast in was Modern Warfare. And they're like, we want to show you this footage because you're going to be one of the pilots. I was one of the pilots in the C-130. And their plan was like, really? They're like, yeah, this is what these guys sounded like. It's like, there he is. Boom, he's down. It's just that. And they were like, we need you to be as flat as possible. And I was like, that's, again, the attention, Infinity Ward especially, and this is not a disparagement on everyone from Sledgehammer or even, I can't think of their name. They do.
Treyarch.
It started with Infinity Ward. And this thing was born out of Vincent's mind, and for it to be almost an escalation from Medal of Honor into Call of Duty, and everybody else just kind of like got their chance. They were like almost the guitar techs for fucking Joe Perry, and then they just decided to become the guitarist for their own band, and they're all great, and they're huge studios, but no Call of Duty has ever felt to me like what Infinity Ward did. It's always felt a little derivative of, even though I had a blast with Black Ops and I thought it was great, it just was never as good as Modern Warfare, especially.
Still my favorite, which is relevant to what we're talking about today, but I should intro the show before we get there. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Play, Watch, Listen. I'm Alanah Pearce. I am joined by video game composer Austin Wintory. T is next. Video game actor Troy Baker and video game director Mike Bithell, who I think a lot of people missed the PSA, even though I feel like we talk about it. Mike also does code. People are like, you guys need someone who knows how to code. Mike is also that.
I mean, I'm not good at it.
Boom.
I'm not good at it.
How to do it.
I do. I have written a bit of code in my time, yes.
Yes. Off the top of the show today, I just wanted to address that something super shitty happened this week. We are not going to discuss that topic. We're going to stay on topic, but I did just want to say to everyone who makes video games, thank you for your hard work. Thank you for the stories that you create that a lot of us get to experience, that shape a lot of people's lives, do a lot of good things. So thank you for all your hard work. We, couldn't be more thankful, or at least I couldn't. I don't know about the rest of you chumps. But thank you. All right, we're talking about remakes. We're actually doing it this week. I've had this Midgar background, I think, like 3 weeks in a row.
Fine.
It's happening.
You mean like Star Wars?
Fine.
Like Star Wars?
Yeah,
I was going to say, but about Star Wars first. I wanted to bring up.
I'm still watching the Clone Wars, and it's still very good, but we're not talking about it. Has anyone other than Mike or I been playing Final Fantasy?
I still haven't.
I still haven't.
Yeah.
And I've not gotten super far in it either, to be honest.
Still in the opening train.
I'm where have I got to? I'm sure if you're like a Final Fantasy VII nerd, you're screaming at the screen, and I respect you, and I would be the same about other games, but like I'm at the town where you get the place. You live next door to a guy. There's a landlady with a massive ball of hair on the back of her head. Yeah, played by apparently the villain from Power Rangers. That was my fact. I found out on Twitter. You know with the
Wait a minute.
Spiky hair. What was her name? I can't remember.
Well, I know the landlady that you're speaking about. I don't know about
so she's
Power
played
Rangers
by the main big bad in the original Power Rangers. I'm forgetting the name of. This is the worst anecdote in the history.
I know what you're talking about. That lady's
Not
very.
the worst.
There's a person that she's an actress who played another person.
She does a thing
some time ago.
Those voice actors, they be working on multiple things. I tell you,
they do
every time.
Mike, how is it that you fully missed out on Final Fantasy? Like, that surprised me that you somehow
well, I was a PC gamer as a kid. Like I didn't have a console.
Me too. I played Final Fantasy VII on PC.
Did you? You see the only kind of
exactly. Where's your excuse?
Yeah, right. I guess the only kind of Japanese game even that I remember playing as a kid was Metal Gear Solid. Like that was it. And my God, is Metal Gear Solid mind blowing if you are a kid who has no knowledge of anime. No knowledge of like Japanese culture at all. Like you play Metal Gear Solid, it just blew my mind. But no, I never really got into the Final Fantasy games. I remember like I think trying 10 at one point, but like that's the one where it's a big sphere of water, right? The sport they play in that. But yeah, I never really JRPGs in general. Just never got into them. I played a lot of like BioWare and Bethesda stuff, but just never got into the Japanese side of things, which I know is immediately a whole massive swathe of awesome games I've missed out on. So for me, it was exciting because it seemed like different. It seemed like I could get the story, but via from what I know is like a more action-focused version of the game, which is interesting.
How old were you when you started playing games, Mike?
So I was playing PC like old Apogee style, like Commander Keen and kind of stuff like that when I was like, I guess like 8, 9, 10, but then in terms of actually like being like a gamer who was into games, like not until I was like in my like mid to late teens. Like I'm one of those rare game designers who didn't kind of grow up obsessed with games, mainly because I think my parents just didn't want me playing games very much. I remember my mum like being like, we don't want you to waste your life playing computer games, and obviously I bring that up every Christmas. So I think,
what now, Mom?
Yeah, I've proven it to you. But yeah, it was I was like, Dreamcast is where I got into console games in particular. Like that was my my era.
Interesting.
So I basically have the tastes of someone about 10 years younger than me in terms of games, in terms of nostalgia and stuff.
I feel like Final Fantasy VII is such an interesting one because I would have been, I don't know, maybe 3 when it came out, 4. I was 4. I just did the math. Bad at it. It takes me a while. But that one was the first Final Fantasy to get extremely popular, though I feel like, I want to say like maybe general industry consensus is that 6 is the best. A lot of people obviously miss that.
Not the consensus for Troy.
Wait, what?
It's also not community consensus. It's general industry consensus, which is a whole other thing. It's definitely a huge thing at IGN when we'd make those, Final Fantasy rank lists. That one was very, very heated. Someone who couldn't make the meeting sent an angry email being like, I just think it's like really fucked up that you guys didn't consider this. Like, that gets so intense. My favorite is 9 because it has this, probably because I was the right age to play it, but it's just got this like very whimsical fantasy feel to it. It's very pretty and the characters are actually really happy, whereas like I feel like Cloud, especially early in Final Fantasy VII, is just a dickhead. He's just rude. And it's so weird to have such an iconic character and everyone acknowledges him as being so iconic, and he's just this kind of grumpy, selfish piece of shit who's just trying to make money. Like, he really is just a muck.
I assume he goes through an arc though, right?
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Well, because a lot of bad shit happens to him.
Right, okay.
He actually has a really interesting arc, and I'd be interested to see if you finish this game, Mike, what happens, or what you think of what happens in this game, because if you haven't played the original, they kind of change Cloud's
I've heard that there's some, like, it's a different ending, right? Or it's only part of the original game, and that it has like some weird choices. I keep seeing these vague allusions to like weird choices in the ending. Is that what you mean? Like, it's kind of, or is it just throughout?
I think it's very different.
Positively.
Sorry?
Like,
positively?
is it a good change? Like, is it a one of those where you feel like they've improved it?
Look, I really respect what they did, and I feel like the audience is split very 50-50 on this, and the reason that I expect it is because they kind of just threw the word remake on its head. It almost feels like a sequel.
But am I not mistaken that they did something? This game went through multiple iterations, and then because I remember being we were at GameStop's big conference, right? And they were like, they just trashed everything they did, and they're completely redoing it, and they kind of threw everything away. And now I was like, well, I remember when because they showed this first at E3, right? It was the Sony press conference?
Yeah, the same one as The
right?
Last Guardian, I think.
I was in the audience for it. I remember being there.
Yeah. And it was holy, because I remember the first time they showed Cloud, I was like, holy shit. I think they showed the gun sword, actually, was the first thing that was, or the big sword. I was like,
people
holy
lost
shit.
their minds,
Yeah.
And I was like, are they going to do this? And then I was like, yes, no, wait, what if we
Yeah,
so,
I mean, they
what do you know about the timeline of
they rehired a bunch of people to redo a bunch of systems that I don't think was actually story related. I think
from the first, like for the first iteration, or what? Rehired from where?
It was maybe halfway through, and I know one of their main job listings was for someone who could work on the battle mechanics. So I think it was probably mostly gameplay related. An interesting thing about, I was very confused about this game, and if a lot of people were, and they were saying it was going to be episodic, and I was like, how does this game work episodic? That doesn't make any sense. You're going to charge me the same amount for several episodes of Final Fantasy, which can take 100 hours to finish, maybe. It's actually not episodic. They've just split the game into, I would guess, 3 parts, and it is 3 full games, is the impression that I get. I think Final Fantasy VII Remake, as it stands, is a very complete game. I don't imagine they changed the story very much. I would think that the vision, the two who worked on it especially, would have had it's very Kingdom Hearts, really. They would have probably had a through line from the very beginning. But I really like what they did, because, like I said, it's not a true remake. They flipped that idea on its head and made it a sequel remake, in that it's the same characters going through the same thing, but depending on how you look at it, and without getting into anything too intensively, like a different timeline I just think it's very creative. Like it's
It
very
has the-
creative.
it's
How
weird.
they did.
How is that not just a remake then? If it's the same characters.
No,
same
I know what
events,
she's
but, like,
referring
an
to.
alternate-
Like, I don't know the original, but there's definitely like a feeling of like walking into a party where everyone's already been talking for a couple of hours. Like, you have this vibe as you're playing it of like, there's little in jokes and stuff, and there's like, and
You
I'm
need
like,
a previously
that's
on.
well, but it's not. It's more subtle than that. Just the turns of phrase that are used. There's a moment where he walks into a room and a bad guy yells something at him, and he says, "That's my line," and the camera holds for a second as if that's a moment. And it was like, is that something where that was his line in the original, and they've taken that line and given it to an enemy?
Doesn't that still land it squarely on this is a remake, but it's just self-aware of its predecessor? Like, because I remember, like James Bond until Quantum of Solace, no Bond film was ever a direct sequel. But the first non-Connery on Her Majesty's Secret Service with George Lazenby, the opening scene is him trying to rescue a girl.
I love him so much.
What?
I love you so much right now.
I like that he used non-Connery as a word.
The non-Connery, yeah. Well, that's all actors other than Sean
canonically?
Troy is an exemplary
Non-canonically?
non-Connery. And so George Lazenby, he gets slapped by the girl. He tries to rescue her in the opening scene from drowning on the beach, and she slaps him, and he looks straight at the camera and goes, "Well, that never happened to the other guy." And then they roll the main titles, which is full of shots of Sean Connery. And they had avoided showing his face up until that. Like, he's driving his Bond car, and it's like a close-up on his hand, a close-up on lighting the cigarette and all that. And it's like they were just screaming, we know it's not the same. We know it's not the same, but just bear with us, bear with us. And I feel like it's like an in-joke to reboot. It's not continuing. It's like trying to palate cleanse. It feels like what you're describing feels kind of similar.
I'd agree. Yeah, it's not I don't want to call it a remake because it challenges the idea of a remake, and that's maybe me reading into it too far. You could argue against that cohesively, just fine. But I feel like it now that I've finished it, seeing the phrase remake on that box art to me is like, it's like it means something different for what they did for this game, which a lot of people are really upset that they changed so much stuff.
Is almost...
Well, I keep seeing it as my head has changed the word to be capital R, capital E, make, because that's what they do with Kingdom Hearts, and it feels very Kingdom Hearts.
They made it
just
again
like
rather than remaking it.
Yeah, pretty much. They made the thing, but they altered it. It's like if someone edited the original script, and those are still two very different versions of the same basis.
Sounds almost like a reboot rather than a remake. Almost.
It for sure is more of a reboot than a remake, but that is still kind of a theory because we won't actually know until the second one comes out.
So, do you think it would be more accurate? What is the better question to ask is, what is the benefit then of including 7 as opposed to, now I understand why, like, take 13, right? They did 13.1, 13.2, 13.3. It was a continuation of this IP, this franchise, looking at 13 as an individual thing versus going 13, 14, 15. At what point do you not just call this Final Fantasy 16 that just happens to have these characters and just happens to have these world?
At the point where you want to make about half as much money.
Is that what? Do you think that's what it is?
So I mean, we could get into the whole like discussion of like remakes as risk management is definitely like, I mean, the money thing's a very blunt kind of bad way of putting it, but it's risk management. It's with any remake, it's a risk based decision.
But then you also immediately beg the comparison, so that could drive your Metacritic down, which drives your sales down. Which there's all. Are you not just like potentially trading risk?
I think Final Fantasy VII, being one of the most iconic games of all time, was always going to get a lot of hype when it was called the Final Fantasy VII Remake, so I understand that. But it is also, I even feel like that's creative. I feel like there's this meta to the name that, again, I could be reading into that isn't there, but I really feel like it's a very much, I don't know, it feels like endgamey to me in some ways. Like, it feels very...
like it's the true Final Fantasy.
Sort of. If maybe there is a Final Fantasy. I think that was actually supposed to be 6. It was going to be the last game.
Well, it's meant the first one was
really?
meant to be the
I was
final
gonna say,
one.
isn't
You're right. The first one was.
Yeah, that's the whole story, isn't it? Like every
whole
one of
studio
them
was
was
gonna
sort
shut
of
down.
anticipated. Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, until 7. And then it was like, my good, this is going to be just fine. Up to 15, we're doing great. But yeah, I feel like the naming choice, like in terms of remakes, does make perfect sense to me. Like for business reasons, like you said, remaking and remastering things, people are going to buy IP. They know this is obviously a huge thing in the film industry as well. The one question I've always had about that is why EA doesn't do it. They won't remake Mass Effect. They won't remaster Mass Effect. They're against it. And my brain's always like, you have this franchise that people absolutely adore. You're EA. Why?
I have a theory. It could be wrong. And I might disagree with it as I go on, so apologies if I do.
Excellent.
So
I can't wait.
So the business case is deeper than just like name recognition. The business case is it's risk, not just in terms of like sales, but in terms of development. So the great thing about doing a remake or a remaster is you know the game you're making when you start. And that never happens. When you're making a game, like there's so much creative risk in terms of, are we going to make a good game? Or are we going to make a terrible game? Is it going to sell? Is it not going to sell? Is the audience going to care? Are they not going to care? But also just staff things like, can this dev team make this game? You know, and it's really interesting when you're in the process of like pitching projects around like, yes, you're trying to convince people you have a cool idea, but you're also trying to convince them that you like can make sure that the salaries are paid on time so the thing actually gets done.
Don't know what team would make that game.
That's part of it, and I think that's part of it. I think with the other thing though is with all risk management, it's also about the payoff. So what I would bet with someone like EA is such a mega publisher and they're making so much money from their sports games. They probably have run the numbers and gone, we could make a Mass Effect remake. We know how much it would cost because we know literally like how many meshes for characters we need because we could just rebuild everything as it was in the game. Not the Final Fantasy clever kind of remake, just a straight up remake like they did with Spyro, where you just swap all the assets essentially and then rebuild all of the core gameplay code and everything. That's a very quantifiable thing. They can go, okay, Mass Effect will cost exactly this amount. It will take this amount of time. They also can make some guesses about how it would sell based on, you know, all the Mass Effect games, but also on like Dragon Age and all their history with RPGs. I bet they've run the numbers and gone, we could pay 200 people to make this and we would make X, but we could pay those same 200 people to make something new, and either we make no money or we make so much more money than we would from Mass Effect remake. I think this is something people often don't realize, that when you're a publisher and you're managing a whole staple of different games, you're trying to get the hit. Nobody wants from a publisher side, publishers don't want like the safe game that sort of makes a decent return on its investment.
Yeah.
They want Minecraft, they want
EA also has a push for games as service.
Exactly, because that's where the money is.
Yeah.
If you're making games as service, yes, a lot of games as service are going to fail. Some, you know, there's obviously things like Anthem, which had not a great launch. But if Anthem had worked, it would have made billions over its lifetime. Like, so it's that kind of. I imagine that's the game they're playing, where they're going, we could make Mass Effect, we'd make money, but probably less money than we could theoretically make if we take a bigger risk with the same team members. So it's like a safer bet, but it's not financially for them. They'd rather make the big bets and try for the next big thing.
I think EA has almost screwed themselves because Ultimate Team is the most profitable thing ever. They make so much money from Ultimate Team. And I mean, when you look in the inner workings of Ultimate Team, you know, they have a system that they don't have to pay for marketing because they market to everyone who plays the game. You have basically cards that you don't have to pay for printing. Like, it's just this constantly, infinitely renewable resource that doesn't cost that much to run even. And they make so much money from it every single year that it's just, I feel like if you have execs looking at Ultimate Team and being like, why can't we make that on every single one of these games? Why is that not working in this? And the way that Ultimate Team even came about is really fascinating. And the fact that the games community accepted that is this very long history of like perfect things happening, where I think it originally didn't actually launch with the game. It was DLC, and then it was eventually packaged in, and then it just slowly became this addition to FIFA annually that never came across as very aggressive microtransaction heavy because of the way that they paced that out, which was completely unintentional. But I feel like, yeah, EA specifically is sort of screwed when it comes to return, because you have a company that is run by business execs and not game developers, which is always a huge indication of how they're going to make games and what games they're going to make, especially if you look at the board of any company. Plus, they're publicly traded, so that means they care about the stock market, so they care about making a lot of money. And if you, even to your stakeholders, you show them, well, yeah, we have this thing that makes billions of dollars a year. They're like, why can't you make that across the board? Figure out how to do that across the board. They don't care about the game.
Just do more of that.
More of this.
Even
figure out
on the even like the artistic argument, right? Let's forget the business, like the really hierarchically very very business focused guys. The guys below that, the guys who actually like really care about games and want to make cool games. Even for them, what's the upside if they make a Mass Effect remake and it does well, like excellently well, like as well as theoretically it could do? Maybe that's enough of a headwind that they can make a Mass Effect sequel, but that's kind of a franchise that's maybe played out. Like, it's a tough thing to do. Whereas if they go and back like a bunch of smaller projects, or in the kind of 5 to 10 million range, which is small for EA. If they back a few of those kind of things, maybe one of those is the next Mass Effect. No one wants the old Mass Effect. The reason to do a remake is usually either to test the water on like an IP, to go, well, should we, something like Spyro, Activision,
that's
basically,
what
I
Crysis
assume.
is doing?
Say again, sorry.
I think that's
Crysis.
what Crysis is doing. Yeah,
that's a great example, right? Like you, the only reason to make a Crysis remake right now is to see if Crysis could be. But make no mistake, the only reason you check if Crysis works as a franchise now is because we're having a resurgence of first-person shooters making so much money in multiplayer. So there's always like the long term. They need to be spending their money in a direction where they think there's more money. Otherwise, they go out of business.
True.
So
I guess in my head it was just Mass Effect is guaranteed to sell well, because I feel like everyone wants that, and I feel like it's good PR for EA. Like,
it would be good PR.
Like
that's undeniable.
This is the thing that they would want, and there's they make some really odd PR choices. I don't know if I've spoken about it on this show, but I feel like I bring it up sort of often. The EA Originals program, outside of Unravel, which does not count because it fell under a different umbrella, EA doesn't profit from that program. They publish the games. The developer keeps the IP. EA pays for marketing, and they basically get their money back, but any profit goes directly to the devs. For a AAA publisher, that deal is insane.
Yeah.
That means that A Way Out and Faye,
cool.
there have been 2 others, I think, all of the money that they've made goes straight to those studios.
Was
again, aside from
one of those as well?
Yes, I think so.
It's relationship building as well, right? I mean, that's the main benefit to them, is like, if one of those games blows up or one of those developers wants to make something bigger next, then it's good to have a back and forth between EA and them. So yeah, I think it's, but like you say, it's a very generous deal.
It's incredible, and I feel like nobody knows that, and the fact that EA doesn't talk about it seems nuts to me, because it's so good of them to do, and I feel like EA does have negative PR as a publisher.
EA is everybody.
Anti-EA.
That's like everybody. The sort of quote standard gamer, if that even is a thing. But EA is a lot of people's favorite publisher to hate. Like it's for years and years, just like the Midas touch on everything. And
because that's been a thing for so long. Like, I would say a full decade, maybe longer. That people have hated EA. I've always been like, you like their games though, right?
Yeah, I mean, the company
for the longest time they loved them.
Afloat.
Yeah,
someone's buying them.
People still played them. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they had Mass Effect and Dragon Age.
I would buy the shit out of anything Mass Effect, even after Andromeda, which I, just was so saddened by, because I was saddened by it because it didn't suck horribly. It sucked in like noticeably difficult ways, and then it had so much beautiful potential in these other ways, and I was like, this is killing me.
Yeah.
Because man, the first 3 is just one of the best like gaming experiences I've ever had, and if they remade that, I'd buy it on like everything I've got, just as a
they're incredible,
like, throwing flowers at the stage kind of gesture.
So would I. You get those on Switch? Damn, dude.
Here's the question. So that's a different point, which I could understand. Like, if you bring it to a new platform, I understand. But if a game is that good, can it not just hold up? Like, what is the reason for remaking it, rebooting it, re-releasing it?
Mass Effect 1 sort of does not hold up. Half?
Then...
But it's aging out in that.
It is.
I mean,
it's
is
got
it the Mako stuff? Does that really suck?
That's there. The combat is pretty obtuse.
It's also just
menu.
It's just so distracting. Like it feels like there was a really big generational divide in terms of tech in the middle of the releases, because 2 and 3 are so much more polished and so much more current gen quote feeling by comparison. The first one feels like an old game that's really good, and the second and third, especially the third, feel like recent games, you know, that are like they almost are practically just barely past the release cycle by comparison.
Did one exist? Did one cross a generation? Is that what happened with one? Was that in development before PS?
I think that it was, and I think that it, if I remember correctly, you had this cool thing where when you would then port to the new platform to keep your save file, you would have to answer a series of questions.
Right,
so that it would transfer between the two consoles.
That's right. I remember
super
that.
Cool, but it was originally an Xbox exclusive as well.
That's right. Sorry, it was
the
Xbox
whole bundle.
PC, so.
True, which I most recently played it on PC. And with Mass Effect, my thing is I always tell people play 1 on the easiest difficulty, get through it. I still really love that story, and then play the others normally. And
it's
I
really
feel like
hard. It's really hard to do like a AAA. The first title in a AAA franchise is tough. Like that's, you often get that. The second one, you know how to make it. Probably you're in the middle of a console generation, so no one's throwing new hardware at you.
Assassin's Creed is a great example.
Brilliant example, yeah. Exactly
a brilliant concept that even when I was playing through that, I was like, the second game's going to be great.
Yeah.
I also had that with yeah, go ahead.
But I would say that what they did between 1 and 2 was they didn't trust that the franchise was good enough, because everyone was like, just too repetitive, too boring. It's like, okay, then let's swing super far over to the other extreme, and now let's make it GTA. Now let's make it Sims. Now let's make it, it's like, I don't give a shit about collecting art for my uncle's house. Like, I don't need to do those things. And every Assassin's Creed since has lost the charm of the original one, which was just like, it's fun to climb up high, take a look around, and then from that height, kill that guy. That's fun. And it became, well, now we have to do this, and now we have to constantly, it's like, just trust the fact that you're a good game. But going back to what I was saying as far as like, why do this to begin with? If you go, oh my God, that game was so good, it was so amazing, it was so incredible, is that a qualifier, or is saying for that time it was a qualifier? Or because like you look at movies, you're like, man, that movie still holds up. Like I could still watch that movie, and today it is still just as good as it was then. Or is it like, it was really good for that time, and does that determine its overall greatness? Like, just as you're saying, it kind of it doesn't hold up or whatever, can greatness of a game degrade over time?
Yes.
I don't think so. Well, here, let me give the one sentence answer.
We got ourselves a
you
debate.
Can rebut this. I don't think that it's that the greatness has degraded. It's the aiming sort of zone of what, you know, in which greatness falls for a player shifts somewhere else.
You're scoring on a curve, is what you're saying. Like
it's like if you're looking at a map and greatness is this big circle on the map, you've shifted where greatness is because tastes change, technology changes, and that informs taste, and so it's like the whole greatness of its time to me feels like it was because it was great relative to everything that was going on there, and the only way to evaluate it is to literally essentially travel back in time, because now you're comparing it against things that it never had any awareness of. You know what I'm saying? And our focus has changed.
Okay, here's where I'm going to bring it back. There are so many parents right now, and I'm one of them, I can't wait to sit Traveler down for the first time, and he's already building anticipation for this. Like, he understands the music, he understands the characters, but for the first time when he can actually sit down and watch Star Wars, that you can instantly go, I did it, by the way, you're welcome. You can instantly go, well, look, special effects have gotten better. What is compared to has gotten better. This world is now all this, but there's still parents that go, "Oh my gosh, that you have to watch Star." There was even a bit in This Is Us where he's like, "I'm going to sit my son down and we're going to watch Star Wars," and kids still go, that like there's so many reaction videos of kids first finding out that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father. It's just like that
Spoilers,
still holds
Jesus.
up,
Spoilers.
right?
But
You know what I mean? 40
fundamentally,
years we
right,
could
the
do
problem, the difference, I would say the difference is Star Wars, the act of watching movies hasn't changed since you were a kid. So
Correct.
like you
the
sit
input
down,
technology.
it's ultimately like the mode of interaction is what shifts. And I think that's what ages games more than anything, is we are still in the arms race. I think if you sat Traveller down and showed him a silent movie, his reaction would be different to someone who watched a silent movie when they were out. Like the idea, the sense of the medium has shifted. I think
man. I
it would
think
still have
it's still
value for
funny.
him. He'd still watch it and go, "That's really like." He'd still like things about it in the same way as he would like if you put Mario 64 in front of a modern gamer who never played it.
Right.
They'd still think it was cool. They'd still think the animation was fun. They'd still find it colorful and exciting. But the mode of interaction would feel so antiquated.
Yeah. You like there's this whole conversation, I think, very much when it comes to remastering Mass Effect, I don't want to forget about all of the people who have never played Mass Effect because they're aging into games. And I've always had this thing where if you look at the sales results every month, GTA 5 and Minecraft are generally always in the top 10 selling video games. Like, it's very uncommon that they aren't. And for the longest time, I was like, how? Who doesn't own these games? And then you remember that there are millions of people aging into video games every year.
And what do GTA and Minecraft do? They update their control mechanics as time goes forward. So they're always
they constantly have updates. And very extensive fundamentals for those two games in any case. But when it comes to something like Mass Effect, I think a lot of it centers on the experiences of that person. So if you put Traveller in front of exclusively Super Nintendo games for the first year, and then he plays Fortnite the next year, and then he goes back to Super Nintendo, it's going to be a shift. It's like, what is this?
I know parents who've done that, by the way. I know parents who've chronologically raised their kids.
So do
Genuinely.
I.
Yeah. Like SNES till 5. Then you get like.
Don't you ever call it that again?
What the fuck you saying to me?
Call it that.
I'll call it whatever I like. I'll call it whatever I like.
I call it SNES too, to be fair.
That's because it's its name.
Austin?
It's because it's its name.
I've never. No, I'm with you, Troy. I'm partially with you. It doesn't offend me, but it does sound very bizarre to me.
SNES, Muga Drive, Dramcast, Xbox. The PlayStation.
Lynx. I also have a Lynx. I have a Jaguar. I'll go hard, y'all. I don't care. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I think
that's an interesting question.
I think your point, though, of like Star Wars still holds up is that some things are transcendent of time. Like there's no denying that. But that's where I say that's why I like, if you think of it as the map analogy, like if you put a pin on the map and then you draw a circle and then you shift your circle to the left, you could potentially still shift it where that pin has not left the circle, but a bunch of other stuff will have. So it's like Star Wars or whatever, it's not a whole 100% migration. So
your argument is that they're a classic kind of keystone thing, because that's true of like if you show Traveller the like 10 best-selling sci-fi movies that came out in the 5 years after Star Wars, they haven't aged as well, right? Like maybe there is, maybe Austin's right. Maybe you can transcend your point in.
Oh, you for sure can.
History. Yeah.
But there's even like there's movies that I've tried to show. Like I'm probably speaking to most people here. Austin, maybe, I don't know, but there are certain movies that came out in the late '80s, early '90s that Red Dawn. That's mid '80s, but like Red Dawn terrified me because it wasn't a movie, it was a fucking training video. It's like, this is going to happen. We're going to look out the window of our school and we're going to see Russian paratroopers dropping into our fields and taking over. I mean, that's the zeitgeist. That's where we live. So I believe that there's some things that are contextual, right? But I also wouldn't say that Red Dawn is one of the greatest movies of all time. I would say, dude, it's such a good movie. Back to the Future still holds up.
Utterly
still
perfect
holds up.
movie.
Yeah.
It's a perfect movie. Die Hard, perfect movie.
Ghostbusters also.
Ghostbusters, perfect movie. But what's so funny though is that I can look at. I feel that also Hunt for Red October, John McTiernan and John DeBont, the same Die Hard team, right? Wolfgang Peterson directed. Wait. Wolfgang Peterson did.
I just remember the
Wolfgang Peterson
amazing
did.
language shifting scene. That just, oh my god, I love that film.
The best.
So
Push
good.
in. The only other one that did it better.
Did not direct.
No, Wolfgang Peterson did.
He did like
I think
Troy
he did.
and Air Force One and
Air Force One. That's
Air Force
that's
One
the
is a
other one,
perfect movie.
Air Force One is kind of a perfect movie.
I will go to the map.
trivia.
So flawed.
Trivia.
So flawed.
Jerry Goldsmith scored that movie in like 10 days.
Wow.
I think
Because the
everyone
original composer
involved in
got
that
fired,
movie did
right?
what they did in 10 days, but they did it very well. They did it very
Including
well.
Gary Oldman.
The original 100 points if you can tell me 100 points if you can tell me who the fired composer was.
It was
So the guy who did Hotline Miami.
Thomas
Yes.
Newton Howard.
Thomas Newton Howard, my God,
I mean,
what weird alternate universe.
Sorry, James
was
Newton
it?
Howard.
Nope, no, it's a brilliant
Thomas
against
Newman.
type casting.
Well, what do we do with these 100 points if we get them? What can I
John
cash them
Williams.
You
for?
can cash them in for like custom emoji or whatever.
A
like-
full remake of Mass Effect.
No, I know this one. He died.
Nope, he's still
Fuck,
around.
never mind.
Not dead.
Oh, that narrows it down. Not Beethoven, then.
Non-dead,
Beethoven.
non-Connery. Randy Newman.
You got a plane
What?
in me.
Randy Newman, and you can hear it, and it's by and large
I'm just the president
amazing.
on my plane. I'm gonna
Very
go
good.
down if I do it, get away. Don't you worry about them Russians. I'm gonna let
Gary
this
Oldman
plane.
Russian.
For our audio listeners, that was Mike Bithell.
That was not Mike Bickle. Don't put that on me. That was, you could tell that
I
was
love
a
the idea that they'd be
professional.
like, that came out of Mike.
That's right.
Randy,
I've been
Randy
sitting on this
Newman?
talent for all this time of a perfect Randy
Yeah,
Newman impression.
when
Get off my plane. Get his mind to do it.
Oh, amazing.
for
Get
context,
off of my plane.
when Randy's score floated out after it was tossed, Hans Zimmer, who was pretty fresh on the scene, goes, "Hey, I thought I was supposed to be the kick-ass action guy because it is a full-on crazy like ball buster of a score. The big difference.
Can you find it?
I want to
anywhere?
hear this. I want to
not
watch
only
a
can you
fan
find
cut.
it, but not only can you find it, but on YouTube, people have married it into the scene.
That's what I
you
want.
You can see how it works, and you can see why he got fired, because the score is amazing, but he approaches it kind of like, it sounds closer to Independence Day or something, where it's a little slightly bit campy. And so it treats the president like a superhero instead of like an Americana.
But isn't that
'cause
the film?
Goldsmith-
Isn't that Air Force One? Did I watch a different... Like,
yeah,
that
but it
film
looks
is
like
very...
it really, honestly, it plays like he's making fun
Is that the
of
music?
it.
It's...
Yes.
Interesting. Like he's made
By
it
the
a
way-
parody accidentally with the way
That was
it
Troy
sounds.
singing that, by the way.
Yeah,
Pam,
it
Pam
is,
to this
yeah.
day
It's
will
'cause,
tell
like,
you.
Harrison Ford comes on and the music is it's almost like Superman, like da 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 dun da da, and it feels like he's.
I'm watching it.
I'm Mr. President.
Yeah,
I want to see the
it
whole
is-
movie with that score. I wanna-
No, Pam will tell you right now. I could walk in. She could literally walk through like what music is going through your head every day, and she'll be like theme for Air Force One, like blah 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 blah. There's three things that constantly I can even fuck with her a little
how
bit
have
on
we
this.
never established this, and as long as I've known her, how has
I don't know.
How has that not
because
come
that's like one of the tenements of knowing Pam is that she constantly has the theme for Air Force One going through her head.
I feel like you'd get shit done.
You would.
Like I would be motivated
Oh,
all
As
the
he did in the
time.
movie,
Absolutely.
right? As he
Yeah.
did in the movie.
Absolutely.
Like,
Armageddon,
overachiever,
Armageddon
that
would be
guy.
the other one. Armageddon, and there's like three movies that she will constantly watch all the time. She'll either watch Armageddon, Air Force One, or Horrible Bosses. Like you could put those movies on in front
that
of her.
last
and she'd
one
be
is a really
Yeah, one of
interesting
these
talk
things
about a
is not like the
sway. But the other thing the other musical thing that's hilarious is if I want to fuck with her, I'll just walk up and I go 24601, and she has to finish the song from wherever. I could do anything from Les Mis, and she would be like,
Your time is up
I
and
have
your
to finish
parole
it. It's
is
like-
done.
Yeah.
You know what that means.
I like if I turn
try
this on right
Troy.
now, she would have to.
me
No,
hanging.
I'm not her. I can let you have your solo. I don't give a fuck.
You
But if she
were doing a
walked in,
duet,
she'd be
you
like,
just didn't show up for it.
shit.
Sucks. God, I love that show.
We can't. If your pitch is
Just
too
have a
perfect,
loaf
we
of
get a
bread.
copyright strike.
You know what's funny?
Don't worry, it's not going to be close enough to this song. to do
My favorite Jean Valjean is actually Liam Neeson.
I've not heard his version.
He didn't sing it. It was the Victor
Oh, he did the
Hugo
book.
story. And it's a fascinating version of that. But the
all right, here's my segue. You're gonna love this. Are you ready?
Love it. Go.
The version you're talking about.
Yes.
Liam Neeson.
Yes.
It's a remake.
Scored by Randy Newman.
If only. No, scored by Basil Polidoris, who also scored Hunt for Red October, and I took you off of talking about Hunt for Red October, and now we're back in.
Solid.
Now we're back to here. That is your magic shelf, by the way.
The musical knowledge. You're right.
You can tell me who the fucking composer. Oh my god.
He really does know. Yeah.
Who was the? By the way,
Sure
if you guys are watching this, there's one advantage
like
to watching this as opposed to just listening to this is you can actually see Austin not Googling.
I know. Yeah.
Never has a man more visibly not typed into Google to find a piece of information.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
It's almost like a lifelong obsession got turned into a profession. So it's.
I mean, Austin, I think that's great.
Did you guys not just go to the magic premonition device and wish to be an adult? Was that not how it worked for you guys?
No.
I was 10-year-old. I was like,
you just went straight child to adult.
That's
You're
it.
like,
I woke up one morning and I was in my 30s.
Was there like a carnival machine and you put in a thing and you squeezed it?
Yeah,
and spit
I
out
just
and
wished
you wish
to be
it
an
been
adult,
granted.
and now that's what happened.
Also a perfect movie, except for the fact that she is 100% a pedophile.
That's true. that is again undeniable.
Elizabeth
These are
Perkins.
facts.
I feel like nobody noticed that back then. It was just so charming, and in the 80s, nothing happened. There were no laws.
No, it's the whole South Park thing where they're like, wait. There's a hot older woman that's hitting on a guy.
Nice. God, South Park.
We really do cover everything on this show, don't we?
I was resisting.
The greatest podcast.
I was even resisting bringing up Grey Dawn as Troy was talking about Red Dawn. So,
well, I did. Do you?
South Park.
We've had this conversation about. You can, like Austin, if we're using your example of like sort of something that rotates, where some things you can still play forever and some things you can't. I think that's harder for video games, probably easier for film. But do you think that there's a point where in film as well, we, as time goes on and we have a more modern bank of films that we've seen, Star Wars will eventually age out? Or do you think that's permanently going to hold up? Do you think there comes a day when the technology has exceeded so exponentially when it comes to filmmaking that for new audiences who have only watched all of that new stuff, and they eventually go to watch A New Hope, they can't? Or is it going to just stay?
I have a thought, but what'd you say, Troy?
I was going to say I want to answer after you because I have something to add.
After Alanah? Go ahead. Just hit it.
No, after you.
No.
Austin,
after you,
it's your time, Austin. We're not going to cut you off.
Well, my short...
like we always do.
Thank you for bequeathing me with this platform. I think my gut tells me... It's hard to say. Star Wars is... One of the brilliant things about Star Wars is the thing that tends to age movies really fast is their visual effects, and the reliance on practical effects throughout Star Wars has always been one of its big sort of like vaccines against aging.
Sort of counts, Mike. Come on. Huh? Only half counts.
I think it's
only half
counts. Exactly. That's
For the audio listeners, he just pulled out an art book of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which is actually probably a very nice art book.
It's very
nice.
Imagine. Please,
yeah, I can actually finally
about that game.
I can actually toe to toe with you on this one for once.
Can't wait.
Oh, he's gonna get books.
Look at him. You want a Star Wars book off?
I mean, are you joking? I 100% have you guys on the Star Wars book off. You have no idea the Star Wars books I have.
You have.
Are you fucking kidding me?
A Ralph McQuarrie.
I think I have that
collection, starting with the 1977 concept.
That's cool. We'll just jump to this shrink-wrapped Sid Mead. I'll just open it up right now.
To be able to do this.
Okay.
I'll open the Sid Mead if we've got it.
Boys, you're both cute.
Thank you.
No, so I would.
Oh no! Now Alana's getting off into it. Guys, I can't play in this. You guys are playing with Lego that I don't have. Understood?
Star Trek. Okay, now you're just. Oh, there you go. Oh wow. Okay,
wow.
Alana definitely raised the bar.
Wow.
That's quite impressive. That's good.
A 2-volume Ralph McQuarrie. That was nice.
A 2-volume Ralph McQuarrie that Alanah just pulled out for all of our podcast listeners.
Yeah. So the long and short of it is, I think visually it ages incredibly well, and it probably always will, because practical effects are just always gonna, models are models. They're always gonna look good. I don't see how that can age. But even more importantly, Star Wars.
So kids can't watch the prequels?
Those are already aged. I mean, they were aged within a year, and because they're
or immediately.
The reliance on CG is always going to be a problem, and that was why it was so interesting in the '80s when all the Star Wars imitators came out and were using the tech that Star Wars invented, but not as cleverly, and they instantly looked not as good. It's the same with Jurassic Park movies, but again, tangents, avoiding the bait of all those tangents. The thing that I think more importantly will help Star Wars from aging relative to so many others is that it's so grounded in these universal archetypes and themes. It's the same reason why I look and I say, well, there are, innumerable works of literature that are vastly older than like electricity as a modern, and we still go to them and we still learn from them and we still appreciate them. And so I think there are things that that get to the kind of truth of what it is to be human in a way that will make them forever part of our kind of vocabulary.
I mean, Shakespeare on stage is still amazing and transcendent if done right.
But also requires effort. To understand Shakespeare, you have to put effort in. Like
on
that
stage,
something...
like I don't know, is that true? On
maybe less
in
so
book,
on
definitely.
Stage.
On
if you're
stage,
reading Shakespeare, because I remember doing it in
boring.
high school, and I remember hating it and thinking it was a complete waste of my time. It's like, I don't know why I need this, until the moment that I understood it, and I got it tattooed on me. I had this like moment of, holy shit, he has written emotion without telling me the emotion, and without ever describing and just like. Oh, the shattering moment, the glass shattering moment that I remember having with Shakespeare, where I realized what he had actually done and how he had described things that maybe I had felt to some degree in the most poetic way without being like, I am sad. Like, it's just, I just had this incredible thing, but it takes effort to buy into. And I would actually say some books have aged. Sure, we have, say, Odyssey, which people will know forever and probably be forced to read in school.
Hey, easy, not forced. Get to. Nay, have the privilege of reading.
True. But I think that there are a lot of cases where books are really hard to read.
Of course,
they've aged
Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. I mean, those are fucking tomes.
But do you think that's an age issue, or is that an Ayn Rand issue?
Yeah, I think people are tired of her bullshit, to be honest.
But like even Shakespeare's an interesting analog to bring up because he was writing, he has a technical element to his writing that was contextual. The reason why a lot of the jokes, a lot of the puns are pointing to the people specifically of that time in that place, where they were standing versus where those people, where the common folk would be. Versus the stalls, where the elite, the proletariat versus the upper echelon. So I mean, he wrote contextually to the time, and even the fact I am dead, is to be able to convey to the audience what is happening right now. Because so many people will be like, well, I don't understand. This is such a new language that was happening. So that doesn't age, and it does take a huge buy-in, but that is a version of technology that has obviously, we now have camera language, we now have visual effects, we all have these great things that we can incorporate to sell the fact, oh, that guy just died. He doesn't have to go, I am dead. But there's things that, when Alanah, you said, will it age out because of technology? I think, and this is I'm bringing it back to games, the fact that if every game is contingent, its greatness is contingent upon a mechanic or a technical thing, it will always age out. Because you look at Godfather, which is, look at what we're able to do camera-wise, visual effects-wise, everything. That movie is still great because it's set in a specific period of time. It says what it is. It's not supposed to be a modern-day thing. And it's just perfectly flawlessly done, and it's a great story about family, and that will never age out. It will never be look at the bad camera work, look at the bad dialogue, look at the it's just it's perennial.
But for me, I think the point for me is that Godfather was directed in an age where reaction shot and composition had existed for decades, right? Like in terms of as film language, the rules of what was it? What's the Russian movie where they had where they experimented so much with reverse shot with the pram going down the stairs? Can't remember what it's called.
Austin and I were just talking about this. That's God, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can't think what it's called. It's not the one that's also Nazi. It's the other one. Because there's one that's Nazi, one that's KKK, and one that's Russian, and they basically the three of those movies. Say again.
The big three.
The big three. They but like a lot of like what the language of those films, and that's my thing is I guess it's like if The Godfather had been made at a time where we didn't really necessarily know exactly how an establishing shot should work. Like it was, we were if a game predates twin stick controls, that's a fundamental part of the language that it's missing out on. I think that's where we maybe differ. Is I feel like we're still figuring all this stuff out.
Sure, but you could also say that Coppola pushed against that language and he broke. Sure. He didn't break, because breaking the rules implies a lack of knowledge. It's ignoring them. Mm-hmm. The fact that he was like, no, I'm gonna stay on this shot and I'm gonna do a slow push in, because what I'm trying to understand, what I'm trying to sell. And there was no language for this beforehand, is that we are slowly understanding the mind of Vito. We're slowly understanding the position, and then we're gonna match that with a shot of Al Pacino and doing the same thing as like, now you understand that he's moving in this position as well. I understand it's like, oh, now we have an analog, or now we have a D-pad, or now we have an analog stick and a D-pad, so we can now use these mechanics and being able to create a game. But it's the same thing. Like every time that they do something on the touchpad for the PS4, it's like, where's a new mechanic, or we're going to have the speaker come out of it. And it's when you build a game around tech, you are inexorably tied to that tech, and it will never be anything above that.
But I mean more fundamental. I don't mean the gimmicky stuff. I mean the fact that like the A button is jump on an Xbox controller, but only since Halo. So if you played a game on a controller like that before Halo, the same as like I remember when after Call of Duty kind of came out and was massive, every first-person shooter that pre-existed on their settings menu had to add like switch the controls to Call of Duty layout, right? There's those kind of those language. Maybe the shot thing is a bad example. Language, the language of games, the way we interact.
Or playing inverted, right?
Yeah, it's all
there's a certain level of gamer.
Is that what you meant, Troy? Then when you're talking, because you said a game that bases itself on like where its conceit is entirely based on mechanics. That's different than what you guys are talking about. Because the first thought I had was a game that I suspect will forever age well, but time will tell, is Portal. But that's a completely mechanics, like the novelty and charm. I mean, yes, it was charming writing as well.
So is Mario. Mario's the same thing. Yeah, I mean,
Mario for sure. My head goes to is something that I don't think will ever stop being enjoyable to play, because they focus so hard on making sure those mechanics were perfect for what they did, and focus so hard on making sure that jump felt right on whatever environment you're jumping on or whatever else. Whereas, I always make the case for I don't think graphics age as badly as certain mechanics can, but video games are in a really unique position where that's concerned, in that the amount of change we've had in the last 20, 30 years versus film in the last 20, 30 years, obviously video games are a much newer medium.
Exponential jumps.
Dramatic. So...
And the density of those choices as well. Like if you look at Mario, you're dealing with something which has two directions and jump and throw.
Well, it's also stylized versus realism, right? So if you have something that's realism, you look at like Silent Hill or Resident Evil, and you're like, holy shit, they were going for real, not stylized. And Mario, it's not supposed to be a real guy. It's supposed to be a character.
Portal goes for realism, and I do agree with Austin that I actually think Portal is the best game ever made. That's my hot take. Portal, #1 video game ever made.
That's not a hot take. That's actually a very
tough one to
argue. That's a hot take. It's a very slow.
You're right. The take might be cold, but I feel like it's difficult to say best game ever made. I feel like it's Portal. Yeah, it's lukewarm.
The take is carved in marble in the middle of the town square. That's how established the take is.
But I mean, if Portal is realistic, it at least still very distinctly focuses on a visual language of these colors mean these things, these walls do these things. Like everything at least serves a purpose to guiding you through puzzles in Portal. Whereas something like, I'm trying to think of a very realistic game that's aged really poorly in terms of visuals. I guess I don't care about visuals a lot of the time. Like I appreciate something if it is
I can give you one.
Shenmue.
Shenmue 1 has aged badly, despite at the same...
for so many reasons, Mike. For so many reasons. I'm playing it for the first time right now.
Oh, wow. What's that like?
Brilliant. It's so funny. The voice acting is just incredible. The dialogue, oh my god, Shenmue. I can't, my favorite game is Deadly Premonition. It's a bad video game, but I absolutely adore it. Shenmue taps into that same weird, bizarre thing where you're just talking to these very strange people who are written very strangely. The dialogue, oh my god. And yeah,
is that cultural, or is that what is that?
Which part?
You said the writing and the performances and everything. Do you think that's
it's
what determines that? Well, for you?
Specifically for Shenmue, I think what happened was that they tried to cram so much into that game for the time period in which it came out, and it was revolutionary at the time, basically. Did someone just send me a chat?
Yeah, Austin was trying to subtly tell us that he's only got another 13 minutes, but that's okay. Well,
let
me make a point for approximately 13 minutes.
Yes.
Just to wipe out the clock. There's an interesting theme around everything that all the games you're kind of pointing to, which and Shenmue as a counterexample, is it seems like complexity is a challenge. By which I mean games and movies, I guess, that kind of go for incredibly complex, specific stuff. Arguably the ones that kind of stretch the medium and are original and try different things. Those ones are trickier. They can happen, but they can struggle with aging. Whereas things like Portal, Tetris, Mario, those were not the most complex games of their era, but they definitely they followed an idea and a core kind of thing very, very well and did something. And it's also, maybe it's true of Star Wars as well, right? No one would say Star Wars was like a high art kind of nerdy independent movie. It was an independent movie, but it was also nerdy, but it was kind of like, it was talking about family and friendship and love and our place in the universe. Like, it was big theme stuff. So in that way, kind of a classic kind of simple, I guess. Simple, but not as a pejorative. Simple in a positive way. I wonder if that's part of this.
Can I just harp on that for 2 seconds?
Please.
Simple to me is the highest possible achievement.
100%.
Simplistic is the pejorative.
Oh, that's interesting.
That might be my own little sort of language there, but to me, simplistic is condescending. Simplistic is, I have to dumb this down because you won't get it otherwise. Simple
which shows lack of trust.
What?
Which shows lack of trust. That's why you do that. I have to dumb this down because I don't trust you to do that.
Like, to me, but simple is, hey, look at that.
Hey.
Hold on, are we going to say?
Yeah, we're all up here.
Come here, buddy. Are we saying
hey,
good
how you doing?
Yeah.
Me and Traveler are having conversation, Troy. It's fine. We're hanging out. Hey.
Aww.
Traveler was like, I really want to
have
get
thoughts
in on
on
this
simple
versus simplistic. Yeah. I think
Oh,
simple.
he's got a little giraffe.
He's got a little giraffe.
The Last of Us.
All the Last of Us fans are loving this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Were you going to say good night, buddy?
Good night.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Very cute. Aw.
That hair.
I know.
It's genetic.
Yeah.
But yeah, my go-to for like simple is like E equals MC squared, right?
Thank
like
you, buddy.
That's.
It's about time we got to the theory of relativity on this show.
Oh, nice. Some RLX foam.
Cool.
It's actually steel.
Also, what you're
Troy's really
saying is
strong.
also very important when it comes to marketing, including for video games. You know the game Dream Daddy? Mm-hmm. The dad dating simulator?
Oh.
I thought that was something on Grindr. Go ahead.
Yeah, probably. That game, I mean, sure, it came from Game Grumps, who have a very big install base, but the shareability of that game, because of the conciseness in which you could share a lot of information about it, was key for marketing that game. And that you call it Dream Daddy, that immediately gives you an image. You see the image, and it's also the dad dating simulator. They managed to make it an acronym for DADDS, I think. So it's even the acronym is dads. Just basically
I never
everything
noticed
about
that. That's great.
Yeah.
It's high
Everything about
concept,
that
right?
game.
Film call it high concept. The kind of Air Force One, die hard on a plane. Got it. I'm already going to buy my ticket. You know, it's that same idea, right?
Marketing is most effective when you can share something with the least information possible. And I think that's why Twitter is such an interesting medium, is you can tell if something's going to go viral or whatever else based on how accessible it is to a large number of people. So yeah, like Dream Daddy is in theory simple in terms of how you can market it and how quickly you know what it is, and you get an understanding of what you're signing up for if you buy that game. But that doesn't mean it's simplistic or dumb, because it's actually still a very creative game with very heartfelt characters and beautiful art, and etc. And yeah, I think simple is a huge credit to something. And I mean, George Lucas, I feel like was pretty intentional about that. And the way he talks about Star Wars is he's just like, well, I basically just looked at religion and picked all the main themes
mythic,
and then
mythology,
wrote about them.
Yeah.
So Dream Daddy will outlive Star Wars. That's the.
I remember. I seem to recall a kind of post-mortem on the success of Fez, citing specifically the shareability of GIFs of the rotation of the world on Twitter was like half of the marketing success of that game. Because like it was so shocking and exciting to see the world move. And
you understand so fast.
Yeah, exactly. You instantly are like, I get how the puzzles of that game work, and I'm in.
Yeah.
There was a great example, and I hope I get the artist right. Pope was hiring an artist to do something, and he wanted a demonstration of his greatness. It was Giotto, I think. I can't remember. Anyway, to demonstrate his greatness, he freehand drew a perfect circle. And that was, I remember the movie Sphere, it said simplicity shows perfection in art. Like that's what a great thing to be able to do is like freehand to be able to do something. The most simple thing shows a great amount of intelligence and skill.
Alanah made a face that heavily implied that Alanah thinks she could draw a circle with no trouble. Like,
God,
I don't know.
No. You know, like I've dabbled in art my whole life. I've painted and I've drawn. I just don't have a steady hand in the slightest. So whenever I see someone even draw a straight line, I'm like, how in the fuck have they done?
You know, what wizardry is this?
What magic is this?
Are we at the point where all of us have to just
well,
talk
I was
about
going
all
to
the most
say,
important
Austin,
things?
before you have to leave, did you want to tell us your story last week that I cut you off on?
I'm ready.
About them
I'm
seeing
ready.
a movie
Mike,
with Genova Chen, I believe.
Yeah, we were talking about the 300, but I'm trying to remember how that came up. Oh, like, what
Don't
was the
worry about it.
context?
Just tell the story.
Just tell the story.
Well,
We're
but
comfortable already.
the story is
Austin,
so
you gotta
kind
go.
How did it come up?
It's so the story is so out of like the blue, because all I was going to talk about was how in the movie I remember watching it and hearing music at the beginning and going, that's music from the Julie Taymor movie of Titus. And then it turned out what had happened was that the composer was basically ordered by the studio to rip off Elliot Goldenthal's music from Titus.
Was it like a temp track or?
It was a temp. Yeah, it was a temp that nothing he did. He was writing music even while they were shooting, and yet they were like, "Nah, this piece." And it got so close that Goldenthal sued Warner Brothers and won. And I remember I was subscribing to the Hollywood Reporter and Variety Dailies physical magazines in those days. And I remember opening it up before I had heard the results of the lawsuit, because of course it was big news in composer land. And I open it up and there's a full page ad Warner Brothers bought as part of the settlement that says, "We apologize for our abuse of Elliot Goldenthal's music." And Warner basically had to kind of take the fall for that. And the joke was that Goldenthal made more money by not scoring the 300 than conceivably Tyler Bates did by doing so. I don't know if that's true, but if you buy the album, like if you go on Spotify now, it'll say like variations on Elliot Goldenthal next to the tracks as part of the permanent thing, and only the physical album. So yeah, I don't remember how we were in the world of like copyright or IP or something, and
we were deep in it. Yeah,
we were.
Can I ask you a quick question, Austin, before we wrap up? Do you think that scores or soundtracks could ever have the need to be remade? And I ask that question coming from a person who likes a good I had an emo phase and I like a good My Chemical Romance, and I listen to them on Spotify, and the audio is noticeably lesser quality than I would want it to be now.
That's just the taste you've developed in these intervening years. That's all that is.
Actually, I think Mike's not wrong. Like something like some music remarkably never seems to age in that way, like Bowie or the Beatles, or like there's some people that are doing things that are technically very dated, and yet they transcend time in such magical ways. But funny enough that you asked me that, because when we were talking about Final Fantasy VII, I had kind of queued up and then I forgot about it to gripe about, of all the things for them to cut corners on that game, the fucking music is all still sampled orchestra, despite the fact that they spent a fortune remaking every aspect of it, and it's clearly samples trying to sound like a real orchestra. And it is also one of the most beloved video game scores ever written. Like, Nobuo Uematsu is routinely talked about as the John Williams of video games. And they even did a live from Abbey Road with full orchestra Final Fantasy concert / live stream a couple of years ago. And Final Fantasy was also the first ever video game concert with proper orchestra at Disney Hall, 20 years ago, shortly after Disney Hall even opened. It's like they have so much tied into that music in this specific title, their brand overall musically. There's just so much. There's so much kind of golden heritage there. And then I listened to bits of because I was excited. I thought, ooh, it's going to be interesting to hear all these classic bits, but kind of properly produced now that they have budget and bandwidth and all that. And I went back and I was like, that's a Spitfire library. That's Cinesamples or whatever. And I was like, this is MIDI.
I would never have known.
It fooled me completely. I was like, this is MIDI. I was like, this is amazing.
Way to get them fired up.
It's better
Holy
MIDI
crap.
than it's better MIDI than back in 1997. But
that means that you were looking for remakes of songs that at the time, as you said, did not necessarily have the bandwidth to be of a certain quality, which I feel like probably happens in Troy's industry as well. And that, if we're talking about Shenmue, some of the issues with the voices in that game are that the audio quality is so low because they packed so much into Shenmue. And
it's all on a CD-ROM
Silent Hill
as well,
2
presumably.
remake, man. I got death threats over that
so
shit. So
I mean,
yeah.
in stark contrast, right before they got gobbled up and disappeared, LucasArts remastered Monkey Island. And it's one of the best remasters of all time because if you hit F12 or something, it will crossfade to the original. And
Halo did that.
What's amazing?
Another World did that.
They did that where the music was all MIDI because the original was 91 or whatever, right? So it was done using this very innovative MIDI system at the time that Peter McConnell helped develop called the iMuse, which was super interactive, MIDI synth music. But it was all supposed to sound like steel drums and pan flutes and stuff because it's Monkey Island. So they went and recorded. My friend and colleague who was at the time at LucasArts, Jesse Harlan, was spearheading this project to record all that with live instruments, but duplicate all the granular interactivity. And the crazy thing is if you hit F12, it will crossfade the music on that exact beat to the original or back.
That's
and I was
dope.
they put so much work into that feature, which is basically for nerds like me and 0.01% of other similar people. It was so cool. So that was one where the remaster, it simultaneously elevated the quality immensely while paying enormous respect to the original. I was like, this is the perfect way to do this. So great.
Troy, I want to know why you were hiding when I asked Austin the question about music aging.
Oh my God. Because we'll be here for a whole other hour. As far as like Nick Drake Pink Moon, the low fidelity of that is what makes it so great. And understanding the Dark Side of the Moon, the way that they made that record, A Day in the Life for Beatles, the fact that they went between all three rooms of Abbey Road and ran and hit play and record on each machine because there was no SMPTE. There was nothing to link those things together. It's that's part of the narrative, and you shouldn't. I look. There's a version of this where you say, yes, I want to make this accessible to a whole new generation, but I always say create, don't recreate. Just try to create something new. Take the inspiration, take the emulation, and be different. Do something new with that idea. And that doesn't mean we're gonna make Ghostbusters with girls now. That I'm not saying do that. Let Ghostbusters be Ghostbusters and create something new. We're all still telling the same story. It's a boy meets a girl. It's a boy and his dog. It's always the same story. The hero's journey. It's just find a new, interesting way. That's why I think U2 is still one of the greatest bands, and Bono is one of the most amazing lyricists. Don't make the South Park reference right now, Austin, because he takes a simple thought and puts it in a very novel way. The lyrics are always fuck. That's what I've been trying to say.
That's why Shakespeare still works. Bono and
no
Shakespeare.
Shit.
Bono,
it's still just
Shakespeare.
Bono, Shakespeare.
Does
you know.
does
the only
YouTube come up
person
Randy
more than
Newman.
Star Wars on this show? Or?
I don't think quite.
I'm just gonna have to cancel my AAA Thomas Was Alone remake. That's my main takeaway.
Damn
from the
it!
whole
I
thing.
couldn't.
Please,
I was really
please don't do
excited
that.
for the deathmatch, like battle royale mode.
I was gonna.
By the way,
Troy
I'll
was
say
Troy was
one
gonna
last
play
thing.
Thomas. We would have got the music. Would have been a 500-piece orchestra.
Yeah.
Austin, I had a season pass one year to Composerland. It was one of the worst amusement parks I ever went to.
I would be the
Anyway.
first to agree.
I wanted to.
So much just depression. Go ahead, Alanah.
If I talk about the history of my industry, if it's games media or even content creation in general, it's so funny because looking back at the archives of games media is like IGN had a babes section.
Yeah.
Games media is so
Oof.
young that the biggest
Oof.
change that I see in actual games journalism, or it's media is probably the correct word, is just that all of the outlets used to have like a part where they put women in bikinis for some reason. And all of
not.
that's gone.
Thank
It's like
God.
that's the biggest progression.
I think
we've
some
had.
websites still have that.
Probably. When I was at IGN, we at one point took a bunch down. Like without permission, it was just like, I'm gonna delete that. That's a bit off. And then there's some reviews that are written like Lara Croft is a sexy chick. Like some of it's still really bad. But that's the biggest noticeable age.
I'll throw this one thing. Just building upon that, Alanah. Watch the Beastie Boys documentary. That's some great homework.
Just
for
got
you
an ad
guys.
for that yesterday.
It is so.
It's on my
good.
list. I want to get to it.
It is so good. Whether you are a fan of Beastie Boys, I am. But whether you're a fan or not, it is insightful. It is educational. It's provocative. It's entertaining. It's great. It's absolutely great. So I can't. But they hit on that specifically as far as like here were poster boys for misogyny and how much they have changed. And it's almost impossible to believe that the two people that are on stage are Ad Rock and Mike D. It's crazy. So.
Alrighty. On that note, I'll watch that sometime this week. Thank you for the homework.
Yay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode. We will see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.